It's my pleasure to introduce you to Cassius Kiani, and yeah, he's working with Stefan Tual on numerous blockchain-based projects, and also discovering the international realm of regulatory environment, and also discovering that from a very interesting kind of projects. Perhaps some of you know Terra Zero. Anyone familiar with Terra Zero? Yeah. So it's basically a forest that owns itself, and that can govern itself. It has its own wallet, or it can even own more wallets. It can make decisions. It can hire people to chop some of the wood and sell it. But what happens when the forest decides to grow a cannabis field because that yield is better, right? So it's not a forest. Yeah. Well, so what if a river owns itself, which is the case in New Zealand? In some other countries on the globe, nature has its own rights. So when we design complex systems, when, for instance, you want to have a look at the Nature 2.0 track sponsored by Inexus, yeah, then you go into that realm. And how do we keep that governable, and how do we prevent bad things from happening? So it's very cool that Cassius wanted to join us from London, where you're based, and share with us his learning so far in the international realm of regulators and regulations and projects you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, Cassius Kiani.
Can everyone hear me? Perfect, wonderful. So first of all, it's incredible to see so many people gathered in such a small space, purely to be interested in blockchain. I mean, this wouldn't have happened 5-6 years ago. This is incredible. So that's the first thing I want to start with. I'd also like to open up with a joke, which might be kind of timely here. I might be the only one that finds this funny. But why is Bitcoin's difficulty so high? Oh, you know it. You know it. Too much hash. Way good. I'm glad I got a laugh from that. Fantastic. Cool. I thought that would be relevant. Cool. So, well, what I'm here to talk to you today about my two favorite things, which are DIDANs and blockchain. And unfortunately, one of my least favorite things, which is regulation. But regulation isn't really the root of all evil by any stretch. I mean, let's be real, there's regulation on the blockchain in the form of consensus algorithms. Ultimately, regulation is great at keeping people safe, right? It's great at keeping industry safe. It exists for a reason. But there is a big problem with regulation in general. And that comes back to the analogy of it's too big a brush. So the idea that, essentially, if you're X, then you must Y, or you must be Y. And this is the problem with regulation, is that regulation wants to force you to be something you're not. And if that doesn't work with you, to be something that you aren't in order to get what you want. And that fundamentally becomes quite a big problem in the real world, because as we've seen with labels and stereotypes, they tend to often come with detrimental consequences, as we've seen over time. And there's a few instances which we can't talk about, but I'm sure we can all think about and relate to. Now, when it comes to blockchain technology, I'm going to give you a really bastardized definition of blockchain technology, but it's one which is, at its core, probably the most simple. And that is that, essentially, all blockchain technology is a means to exchange value without trust. It really isn't too much more. Of course, we can turn around and go through technical details, and yes, you can all turn around and say, oh, Cassius, you haven't considered all of these things, but really, on a really macro level, that's what it is. And when we look at cryptocurrency, well, cryptocurrency really is just incentivization for these blockchain networks. And ultimately, more than anything else, it's a store of value in some cases and a key to open doors in others. But regulators tend to focus really heavily on cryptocurrency more so than blockchain technology. And the issue with this is that, let's first of all realize that blockchain technology is not new money, it's new technology. But the problem is that if regulation doesn't begin to see that and change, then perhaps one day blockchain technology will become new money, because as we've been met with over time is when you put an immovable object in front of humanity, over time we learn to tunnel underneath it. And we play a really dangerous game when we put the world's smartest minds in a room and we say, hey, this technology can change the world, but no one wants you to change the world. What do? And you begin to create that tunnel. And ultimately, Web3 is creating a global shift. So it's another shift of kind of power, wealth, and ultimately a new opportunity for agile jurisdictions and jurisdictions in general to begin to shape this technology, this kind of exciting world that we live in, which means that there's a lot to gain, and there are some malicious actors in place, and some jurisdictions who want to capitalize on this purely fiscally, and others who want it to do good. But now is the opportunity to turn around and to do something about this, whether it's relevant to your interests or not. And the great thing about being at the forefront of an industry that's as infant as blockchain is you get a lot of choice in how you can help shape this. And I'm a big believer that revolution is difficult, but evolution is not so difficult. So there's a way where we can all move forward together and we can all win, and then we can turn around and define essentially incrementally what this future looks like. Now, why am I well placed to talk about essentially regulation and agile jurisdictions? Well, essentially we're pioneering a project called the Deodans Project, which is well, we intend to map natural resources to the blockchain. And so what that looks like is we attempt to create rational economic actors through natural resources and natural systems to allow them to essentially work towards their own goals without incumbent organizations or middlemen or third parties turning around and interfering with that. So the analogy here is it's not so much save the whales as it's give the whales the tools to save themselves, as complex as that may be. So as you can see by the wonderful whales, which are either dancing behind me or trapped between ice, they could do something to... Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm British, so this is a common habit. Let me... Oh, my goodness. Of course. No, I'll slow it down a bit. So, essentially, that's what the Deodans Project is. It's a way to create rational economic actors through these natural systems. So essentially, in the case of a forest may look to optimize its stock, which could be its canopy, ultimately the area that the forest occupies. And that allows it to say that it's progressing and doing well. And in some cases, with existing natural resources, they can turn around and minimize externalities for governments, or that can turn around and ultimately, like in the case of new natural resources created, distribute some value to investors. There's a number of ways it could work. But again, the idea comes back to an opportunity to seize the day more than anything else, and how we can take regulation and we can learn from agile jurisdictions and use that to move forwards. Now, the Netherlands in general, as been mentioned before by Scott Nelson, is an incredibly agile jurisdiction. You guys do a lot of things well already, but being from the UK and having a problem with how fast I speak, I can give you an example of a lot of things with a lot of jurisdictions under kind of UK governance which don't move in a useful way, and there's quite a few other jurisdictions which we've spoken to which end up doing the same thing. So when we speak to people about this, the common question is, for what reason would we support a business or a technology which may replace our standing in the world, that may change our order, our control of things? Well, and the reality is, it comes back to this tunneling analogy, because the idea is that while the technology is infant and you're able to turn around and help craft it or help move the system forward in a way which is beneficial for everyone, because that's realistically what blockchain technology is. It's closed ecosystems which benefit people who care for said closed ecosystems, and then they integrate, and the world becomes more connected for commonization. We get the ability to turn around and to help shape this together, rather than have me or someone else define what the future looks like, purely because everyone is unwilling to move or cooperate. And regulation ends up coming back to this kind of this analogy of too big a brush. Everything works in abstracts, and I'm a designer, so I love art, and this is fantastic. This is not useful when we're attempting to move forward and create something where there is a lot of risk. And fundamentally, it's the good and bad actors are tarred with these large brushes, and in some situations, they can be supported and they can be malicious. In other cases, good actors can be heavily penalized in a way which isn't useful or good for anyone. So I'm going to go through essentially a few common problems that we've encountered, and then I'll touch on some solutions, which may seem obvious once we've gone through some of the problems. And some of the problems might seem quite rudimentary, but they're problems that are common and everyone faces. And the first one, really, is this question, and I get this all the time, and this is, do you know a bank which is crypto-friendly? And that's really interesting, because it's not a bank which is blockchain-friendly, it's a bank which is crypto-friendly, and the entire ecosystem in some way will take transactions across cryptocurrency. Now, if it's a store of value like Bitcoin, obviously Ethereum, it doesn't really matter too much, but I get this question probably more times than I can count on a weekly basis. And the reality is, I don't usually have an answer other than, well, where are you based, or where do you intend to be based? And then the question comes back to, again, which jurisdictions allow cryptocurrency and fiat to be, interchangeable, or more than that, people to declare that they are taking both. Because in the UK, it's an incredibly risky game to turn around to any bank and say, oh, well, actually, I am looking to take cryptocurrency as well as fiat. And there's been a number of occasions where essentially bank accounts have been shut down for transactions with Coinbase, Kraken, all sorts of things, like not nominal things, let alone having invoices paid or ultimately turning around and running an ICO. And this is where people tend to look for agile jurisdictions, purely because of banking, if nothing else. Regulation around banking, especially in the UK, is pretty strict, and it's difficult, and ultimately, it's something that comes up time and time again. And then this is the second problem with blockchain, is that blockchain is finance. There is, in the eyes of most regulators, it is nothing else. And this is incredibly difficult, especially when you hear the words DLT over and over again. Yes, one aspect of blockchain technology is a distributed ledger in some instances, or most. But the real issue with that is that you overlook all of the other promising aspects of this technology and how it can be used, especially when it comes to the idea of exchanging value. And ultimately, value does not have to be exchanged in the same way that everything has to be exchanged with fiat and services. I mean, we can have a conversation right now. We can talk about all of the exciting things going on in the blockchain space. You could give me pointers, I could give you pointers. That's an exchange of value. There's no fiat involved. So to turn around and say that blockchain is finance becomes quite difficult, especially given the way that it allows value to be exchanged. But more than that, blockchain technology allows us to change the way that the social mesh that we all exist upon, technology like the Diadans project wouldn't be possible today without blockchain technology. And while there are clever people like Willy Schmidt who've proven these things in the real world, the premise is that the blockchain technology is simply a way of aggregating all of these clever kind of aspects of tokenomics, incentivization, everything else. It's not merely DLT, and to get hung up and focused on that starts to create fundamental problems in the space. And problem 3 is nominal understanding. So Bitcoin really is only 10 years old, which means that to be an expert in the field, you either have to have created a large-scale blockchain business, or you have to be an incredibly smart professor that spent a lot of time with this. I mean, most of us aren't experts. I myself wouldn't call myself an expert as much as I am a spectator, an experimenter. And then when we go to jurisdictions, or more than that, people in the regulatory space who want to talk about this technology, they don't have anyone who would be defined as an expert, or even to an extent an experimenter, which makes it incredibly difficult to, one, speak the language, which, yes, I do agree is almost a problem which we all in the blockchain space need to fix. We all need to get better at talking to people about what this technology is, how it works, and how to make it less scary. We do a terrible job of that, especially when we start saying words like smart contracts and Genesis blocks, and then my mother looks at me like I'm insane. But this is a really common problem. And so jurisdictions need to have some level of expertise within there. Now, whether that's internal, external, or however they plan to put it in, the agile jurisdictions, while they don't have this, what they are incredibly good at is they're incredibly good at listening and fundamentally understanding that, yes, they don't quite get this technology, but perhaps there is a way we can speak each other's language. And a lack of process at the moment is absolutely chaos in the regulation space. So if you're a blockchain business looking to talk to regulators and ultimately explore the opportunities of what the technology can do, not only for the jurisdiction, but for themselves, and obviously working together, there's no way that you can talk to these people unless fundamentally what you do is you know the right people, and you go and have a glass of wine with them, which is, don't get me wrong, that's how the world tends to work right now, but it shouldn't be working that way in the blockchain space, not at all. Especially when that punishes innovation quite heavily, because we have to remember, a lot of the world's smartest people don't quite care for spending time with bigwigs in a wine bar or whiskey bar drinking wine and bad whiskey. What they care about is they care about coding, and they care about moving things forward and being innovative. And so some of the best ideas that exist within the blockchain space will never make it through or forwards unless you get business people on board. And the issue is that business people, notoriously, are self-interested parties for fiscal reasons, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone deserves to win in their own way. But the question becomes, how far can we move forwards if we can't find a middle ground or an aggregate around this? And so a lack of processes creates huge amounts of problems in this space, purely because it doesn't give a voice for these people to talk. And more than that, we exist now in a way where things like ICOs, KYC, AML, these are all things which have been around for an incredibly long time. There's still no standardized processes around this, especially across jurisdictions or within jurisdictions. Everyone ums and ahs, and to get a straight answer can usually take far longer than you'd like. And that's not necessarily a good thing when we start to look at our next point, because ultimately the biggest problem that we face right now is the whole watch and wait approach. And the watch and wait approach, more than anything, completely goes against the do no harm analogy of the dot-com boom. And the reason it goes against the do no harm analogy is because when nothing is done to support or allow these businesses a voice or a way to move forwards, you only get two actors that tend to move. And the actors that tend to move are the actors which are willing to take substantial risk and put everything on the line, or the people who turn around and say, well, actually, I can't afford to move. And so they end up in a situation where the most innovative people can't do anything because they're paralyzed by the fear of incarceration, ultimately getting themselves into trouble that they can't get out of. And that's horrifically detrimental when you turn around and say, well, this technology needs to move forward, and it needs to move forward in a way which is beneficial to everyone, apart from 80% of the industry isn't willing to be incarcerated. And there's plenty of examples with this. And my co-founder was involved with the DAO, which I'm sure a lot of you know, was a really interesting case study around kind of smart bugs in smart contracts and ultimately recursive errors. Now, the interesting thing with the DAO was the SEC knew the DAO was happening. They knew this was going on. It was impossible to ignore that at the time the largest crowdfunding project in history wasn't on their radar in some way or another. And if they say otherwise, then I worry what the SEC is doing on a daily basis. But let's be real, they knew about it. And they were allowing the DAO to continue and move forward despite knowing full well that because of the wording that was used, or perhaps because of the use case of the tokens within the system, that if the DAO was to move forward, everyone who was a part of the DAO would be incarcerated. I mean, this is a public report. You can go take a look at it. They would have got more than a slap on the wrist, and God knows what else in prison. But it would have been bad for them. We'll put it that way. Now, the issue is with the regulators here is that the watch and wait approach was terrible because they could have turned around, they could have talked to these people, they could have issued some level of statement at any point in time. And the DAO was not by any means the first project to turn around and say, well, actually, we're doing something which could be borderline grey in your eyes. Who can we talk to? Who can we get in front of? I mean, Ethereum was the same thing, and Ethereum was recently described as, well, it was a security, but now it's not. Oh, well, that's all well and good. Thank you for telling us, 2 years too late. There would have been a lot more, would have got a lot more sleep had I known that beforehand, etc. So it's interesting to see that the watch and wait approach is probably the most detrimental because no one chooses to act. And if no one chooses to act, everyone just becomes paralyzed. And in the case of these large-scale innovation projects, were they willing to take the risk to fail? Yeah, it's easy to do so if you're horrifically passionate about the technology and perhaps you're a 20-year-old Canadian boy with not a lot to lose, right? But this is not the case for the majority of people, especially the people who are looking to get into space or looking to move into the space and they have, families to depend on everything else. Let's remember that blockchain technology works on the premises of game theory and behavioral economics. So to understand how these people move is simple. You understand what they have to lose more than anything else. But then that comes back to this idea of building together, right? And unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of people painting together, which kind of makes my too big a brush analogy a little bit weaker now. But there's a house, and you paint houses in the end, so we're still there. But this is it. Well, I haven't touched on all of the regulation problems in the space. I've touched on a few key ones that I've encountered, and brought up time and time again with the people that we work with and ultimately support in the industry. And the idea is that in order to move forwards, what would help everyone to move forwards is to turn around and to look at this as we are building a future together. There is no segregation between regulators and people in the blockchain space as much as it is we are a race of humans and we interact with the world in the same way. And despite whatever wealth we may or may not have, intrinsically we are the same people because we need to eat, we need to sleep, we sometimes use Facebook and watch too many cat videos, and that's normal, right? So this is the same way that we have to look at blockchain technology and look at it as an enabler for the next future. And so a few of the solutions which I'm talking about may seem like common sense, and they're likely to be things that you guys in the Netherlands may or may not already be doing, because it wouldn't surprise me given how upfront and smart you guys are. So The first solution is to create objective advisory boards. And what do I mean by an objective advisory board? Well, it could be some of the examples which were given by Scott Nelson around kind of incubators or kind of environments to move forwards and to kind of like pioneer this technology. But in general, the key word here is objective advisory boards. So people from a range of backgrounds that are diverse, that have an understanding of this technology from a number of different perspectives. People who work within Ethereum have a different goal perhaps to Neo and everything else. So to have to get the right actors in play and to see what they're doing and ultimately to bring together a board of regulators which can help do so as well is important. At the moment, by no means would I call the advisory boards I've seen objective. I mean, in fact, just simply because you put a bunch of white people around the boardroom table and turn around and say, well, combined they have 200 years of finance experience does not sound like objective to me, especially when we're in a world where the technology is so goddamn complex that there's innovation, like that's been mentioned, every 90 to 120 days simply because bugs exist, errors exist, things need to be changed. So objective advisory boards are arguably the first way to move forward, purely because not only will you get to hear what other people are saying, but more than that, conversations will happen where people listen. And ultimately, innovation is not groupthink. Innovation is diversity. And we've seen it time and time again in the business world, let alone the social good or the world, for the human world, as we call it. So solution 2 is to create a platform for conversations. And so we've touched on this already. But at the moment, there is no simple way to talk to most jurisdictions about this technology. And given how beneficial this is, and given how blockchain technology can pull at this social mesh, this social fabric that we all exist upon, by not having a platform for these conversations, people are missing out. And you're missing out purely because it's like, where the hell do people go? How do people speak? You have to ask your friends, family members, perhaps other people in this space. Like, it's all well and good for people, perhaps, who have contacts at the forefront of this industry, or people who are the founding fathers. That's not an issue. I mean, for me, this is much less of a problem, but it's a horrific problem for a lot of clever people looking to get into the space that perhaps do not know people who have those contacts and can make those introductions. And so there is no platform for these people to talk. There is no platform for these people to interact. And there's no platform for regulators to ultimately turn around and to say, I have these problems, which is why blockchain technology cannot move forward in the way that you suggest. Right? There's a lot of eye-opening conversations that can happen on both sides here, and this is the premise here. It's a conversation. It's two ways. Both parties need to listen. And I'm again firm believer in incremental evolution of this is what will move us forwards. And so having a platform for conversations is the same reason that successful relationships happen, purely because people are willing to listen. If you didn't listen to your other half, your partner, then that would be a really detrimental situation to be in, especially for the best part of 10, 20 years. And this is where blockchain technology is going. It's not going away. So we need to create this partnership, this relationship where there is these conversations that are happening, and there are these conversations where there is diversity, and there are these people who are willing to listen to each other. And yes, I mean, another thing to mention here is that there are safe ways to fail. Again, there are things like the FCA sandbox. You can have a conversation with certain jurisdictions that have said, well, actually, look, we're willing to turn around and talk to you about this. But again, it focuses on the idea of new money, and especially in the UK at least. So blockchain technology is looked at as new money, and if you're not doing something within the fiscal space, at least with blockchain, then you run into a lot of detrimental issues with moving anything forwards or pioneering anything. It becomes incredibly tricky and difficult, purely because it's like, sorry, not finance, we can't create a safe way for you to fail. So if you're going to fail, like, oh, well, that's all well and good. Thank you for encouraging me to change the world, you bleep. Right, so and the last one, and again, I've hammered this home a few times, is really realize that blockchain technology is by no means new money, or at least not yet, right? We do come back to the analogy of humans are self-interested parties at heart to an extent. Commons, we've proven time and time again for tribes, and ultimately the way that we've grown as a society, that we do work towards social good. The idea is that if I give you an asset, I don't mind doing so, because there's a good chance it'll be returned to me in some way, in some way in the future, one way or another. That's how the fundamental economics began to work, with the whole value creation and value capture. So we have to look at this and realize that blockchain technology right now isn't new money, but if regulators are adamant in classifying it as that, then it will become that, because it'll be the only way that we can move forwards. And the people who are passionate about enough about the space will find a way forward. And there will be people who turn around and ultimately take malicious actions or capitalize in a malicious way to get this to where it needs to be. And that would be the really saddest thing here, is that as a proof of concept, Bitcoin was incredibly good at turning around and saying that we as humans can be incentivized in closed ecosystems towards common goals. And we can do that without any third-party monitoring or managing this, right? And so the saddest part about this will be that if we cannot turn around and look at this as a new technology and look at a new way to leverage this and move forward, in a society that's pure to what Bitcoin originally pioneered and ultimately the blockchain is attempting to pioneer, then what we end up with is we end up with history rhyming again. And again, it just comes back to this global shift of power and wealth. We have an opportunity of blockchain technology to create these commons, to commonize things, to turn around and to make the world a fairer, better place, or at least a more trustworthy, honest place where people can interact, build, and change. I mean, we've seen that technology is slowly enabling this with the rise of freelancers and entrepreneurs. You know, nowadays it's easier to be an entrepreneur than it ever has been, which is a fantastic thing to think of. And in the future, perhaps one day with blockchain technology, it will become even easier. Maybe we'll all live in a world where we work towards what we believe is real through a series of microtransactions. God knows, right? Anything could happen here. But the premise is that unless we enable it to happen, nothing will change. Nothing will change at all. And history will rhyme, and we'll end up with Web3 being the next dot-com boom, and all that will happen is we'll end up with another 5 Amazons. Everyone will turn around and be like, oh, this isn't fair. What could we have done? It's like, haha, we were talking about this for years before this happened, but no one listened. Absolutely no one listened. No one decided that now was a good time to act. Instead, everyone said, well, you know, we're kind of happy with the way things are, but don't worry, like the British people, we'll complain when it's raining, sunny, or anything in between, purely because this is what we do, and that's life. And we can avoid that. We can literally avoid that right now. And so, purely because of the fact that I speak at 950 words per minute, I have finished 5 minutes early. Which is a really good thing. And I can't even begin to tell you how painful it is for me to talk at this pace, because I have so much energy that it feels like my stomach is going to explode. So I do hope you've enjoyed this so far. Now, I put my email on here purely because I enjoy speaking to people. So if you have any questions, or you want to shout at me, or you want to ask how I learned to speak so quickly, by all means, please send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to chat and open up a discussion. But this is the thing. This is what blockchain technology is about. It's about enabling these discussions which can change the social fabric that we exist upon. And if you're truly passionate about the technology and how it can be used, then all you need to do is fundamentally have a conversation with someone. And that's what I realized from years of being in this space. There is no harm in these conversations. There is no harm in turning around and connecting with people, because this is how these things work, and this is how we move forwards, ultimately through a consensus. And obviously, I'd be really excited to speak to any one of you in the deep dive later. If you'd love to be confused and attempt to keep up with what I'm saying, then you're in the right place. Please come see me if you want a brain workout, or you want to exhaust all your brain sugar, as I call it, for the day. But yeah, I would welcome any conversations around DADANs in general, blockchain technology, and ultimately, how annoying Keynote is, because it didn't embed my font, and so now everything's in Helvetica Neue, which is a bit sad. But there you go. Thank you very much for your time.